It's been a while. Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you to our training. This makes this seem really formal. It's not a formal evening. It's just because we have this camera. Because tonight we are starting the first of a 5-part series that we're working with in collaboration with New York City Relief. And a lot of people couldn't make it tonight that really wanted to be part of the training, so we're filming it so that we can make it accessible to people who couldn't be here. So don't let the camera and the microphone make it feel like or seem like a really formal setting. This is kind of conversational and a place for us to learn together in collaboration with one another. So I want to welcome, for anyone who's not regular part of All Angels, welcome to All Angels. In this room we have volunteers who stay overnight at our shelter on Sunday nights. We have people who come to our Pathways program to serve food and to be in community with people accessing services. We also have people coming from churches who serve food for our meal on Sunday night. And then we have our staff here as well. And then we have some partners in the room. And so we welcome you all. We're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, just to hear some of your experiences and how some of this applies to your work as a volunteer or as a staff person at All Angels or somewhere similar. Tonight we're starting the series with a title called Creating a Culture of Dignity. This is our whole series is understanding and responding to our homeless neighbors. And our hope for this is that for those of you who are regularly in involvement with ministries, working with those who are living on the streets in shelters or tenuous housing situations, that you would have a better understanding of kind of the complexities that surround that experience, and also to know how to engage individuals and even some groups of people who are going through the experience of homelessness. And so tonight is kind of setting the stage for that. The next 4 sessions are going to be getting into some of the nitty-gritty about housing and shelter, about homeless services, about drug addiction and rehab and detox, and about legal aid, just all the details that kind of are caught up in the life of being somebody on the streets. So I don't want to talk anymore. I want to give the rest of the time to Josiah and to you. This is Josiah Haken of New York City Relief. He's the VP of Outreach, something like that, and has been working in street outreach in New York City for many years. So he's bringing us his expertise. And New York City Relief does a lot of work with resource and referrals, and so they really understand what it means to not try and do everything on their own, but to support people as they send them out to other partners and other places to receive resources. So let's welcome Josiah.
I'm digging this sweet music stand here. $10 says I'll knock it over at some point. So my goal is to take a break. I know we said 6:30 to 8:30 was 6 to 8:30 was the goal. Because of the weather, we wanted to start a little bit late. I am a big believer that if you ever want to get invited back to anything in terms of speaking, you wrap up early. So I will definitely plan on getting you guys out of here, getting out of here on time. But I will also try to get a break in here so that you guys don't just die sitting there and staring at me. The good news is you're not out there, so that's a plus, right? So like she said, my name is Josiah. I work New York City Relief. For those of you who don't know, like she said, is a mobile outreach program. About 30 years ago, a man named Richard Galloway and his wife Dixie were reading Isaiah 58, doing a Bible study, and they decided that, they didn't decide, they felt like they were supposed to come to New York and start an outreach where they would bring the hope and resources to men and women who are in the street through a bus, effectively. I want to start with a quote from Richard Galloway that really, I think, strikes at the heart of what we're talking about today, which is simply put, and I don't have a clicker or anything, so I'm just going to trust you to.
You want me to do it?
I'm leading you to it, Chelsea. I'm leading you to it.
I was eating.
I'm actually in the wrong place already. I'm screwing it up already, so don't worry. So Richard and Dixie started out with this idea that the poor are not a problem to be solved, but a portal to the heart of God. And for us in the room who are faith faith-based. For those of us who are here because of our faith in Jesus, because of our faith that God is real and that Jesus is His Son, and that the men and women who we experience on the streets or in our shelters or in our drop-in centers or in our programs, that there's something to that encounter that is supernatural, that is spiritual. This, to me, sums up really for us what we're trying to go for. Now, if you're not a person of faith, that the good news is that you're welcome here. I'm not going to dive into. This isn't a sermon. My goal isn't to preach at you. But I think it's important that you guys know kind of where I'm coming from and what context I'm coming from, so you can kind of just have a box to put me in. I think that's important. I want to go back to the picture of the gentleman that you can't really see this very well, but this man's name is Oscar. I met Oscar about 8 years ago, and my predecessor at New York City Relief was named Austin Bonds, and he was doing outreach at New York City Relief for many years. And one of the things, again, if the poor are actually a portal to the heart of God, if the men and women that we serve are somehow a way to engage Christ, they engage God, then we believe from the foundation of our organization that it is our duty, it is our obligation to create an atmosphere that is welcoming, that is dignifying, that is where the men and women don't feel less than the men and women who are actually serving. And so for years we've done a really intentional job of creating a space where men and women can be dignified and be cared for. And Oscar was one of the gentlemen that came to the bus about 10 years ago. My predecessor met him on the street, and he was not the kind of guy, some of you know this guy, he was not the kind of guy who walks in the door and immediately asks for help. He's not the guy who approaches you and says, hey, I need help with this. This is the gentleman who keeps his head down, keeps his eyes front, walks up the line or whatever he's doing to get the services that he's hoping to get, takes his food, takes his service, whatever we're doing that day, doesn't say anything and walks away. This is the reality of many of the men and women that we serve in the street, because homelessness is intrinsically lonely. It's intrinsically lonely. Being out in the street, you're often, many of the men and women that we serve are isolated. They may be in a crowd when we meet them at our organizations, but they are by themselves. And Oscar would be the guy who comes up to the bus, keeps to himself, and Oscar is not a person of faith. In fact, Oscar would tell you that he is an atheist. I used to have tons of conversations with him about faith. And faith, not only was he an atheist, he was antagonistic towards faith. There's atheists who don't believe in God, and there's atheists who want everyone else to not believe in God also. Which is more in line where Oscar fell. So the fact that we're a faith-based organization, the fact that we are, we're not shy about it. We're not beating people over the head with the Bible, but we're also not, we're not bashful. If anyone asks, they can figure out who we are. But Oscar came to our location every Wednesday. He would come to our outreach, and he met Austin and get his food, and he would leave. But what we did is that Austin, over time, started to build relationship with Oscar. He started to learned his name. He started learning his story. We learned that Oscar is actually sort of a soccer legend. He's sort of like a soccer god, actually. We would have young men and women from the street who would come up to him while he was getting his food and start telling stories about his exploits on the soccer field. He would be, oh no, and he would be all bashful. But he was quite famous. He's an Argentinian, first of all. That helps if you're going to play soccer. And he grew up in Argentina, moved to the United States, kept playing soccer while he was here, which is not very good on your knees. I don't know if some of you played sports growing up. I'm 3 knee surgeries in myself, so I can be at some empathy there. Played soccer, and then he got a job as waiting tables, as many people do. They get jobs waiting tables in New York City, lots of restaurants. Worked his way up into different restaurant quality levels. He ended up working at Sparks. Is it called Sparks? It's a famous steak. I'm told it's a famous steakhouse. I've never been there personally, but he worked at this I know because he told me all about it. You know, this amazing restaurant where he's serving, carrying these huge trays of food around. Again, also not good on your knees, not good on your joints. Worked in the restaurant, became the captain. I don't know, that means something in some restaurant industries in terms of his level of waiting table. He would send money back to his family. Then, unfortunately, as you can probably guess, is over time, his knees started to go, his health started to go, got a little older, and the game that he was in was not is sort of a young man's game. Like as he got older, he kind of got phased out and kind of pushed out, and then like the arc of his trajectory started kind of going downward. So this man who was a world traveler ended up, waiting tables with politicians and sports stars, ends up in tiny little places, making minimum wage, ends up losing his apartment, getting on Social Security, and then sleeping on the trains. Then he started coming to the Relief Bus. Met Austin, my predecessor. They built a friendship, and this, I can tell you, is one of the proudest men I've ever met. Oscar is a proud man. So my predecessor, as they built friendship, he started to say, like, why don't you come back to my house, meet my family, just have dinner, and then, spend the night, hang out. Now this was over months and months and months. As that progressed, Oscar was like, no, I couldn't impose. Months go by. 6 months go by. They're basically begging him to come over for dinner. Finally comes over for dinner, ends up, I know this is a long story, bear with me. Finally comes over for dinner, ends up staying the night, goes back on the relief bus the next day, back on the trains. Fast forward another 6 months or so, eventually he started spending the night, and they had a room downstairs, a separate room, and he ends up spending the night and living there over time. Now, my wife and I moved to New Jersey to start working with the relief bus, and I moved into Austin's house, and Oscar was already living there. And my wife and I were like, okay, well, we didn't come to New Jersey to work with New York City Relief to serve the poor and kick people out. That wasn't really our calling. So we talked about it, and we ended up agreeing that we wanted to ask Oscar to stay with us and live with us for as part of our family. And he graciously agreed. And this picture is Oscar seeing my daughter when we brought her home from the hospital. And the reason I wanted to go into that elaborate detail to tell you that story in terms of what this is, I know I've been working with outreach in New York City for men and women who experience homelessness for 8 years. And I still have stereotypes in my head. I still have, in fact, I would argue, sometimes volunteering and serving with men and women who experience homelessness can actually reinforce prejudices more so than just dabbling and not actually learning about men and women. Because you can start to assume that the people, like one person that you have a hard time with, or one person that's really extra challenging, actually represents everyone. And you can start to think that that the people who are serving men and women who experience homelessness, and I've experienced it myself. And so I wanted to start off everything that we're talking about tonight with a picture of Oscar holding my daughter, because to me, this is what I want to remember about the face of homelessness. This is not just some random person. This is a person who has a story. This is a person who, has family. And I can tell you that also, when you're engaging men and women who experience homelessness, you're engaging not just the person, but you're also engaging their trauma. You're engaging the issues that they have, the pain that they have, the cycles of depression and hurt that they're bringing with them. So it's never just in a vacuum. So that was really important to me, that as we talk about homelessness, that we're not too abstract. And we're not too, I'm going to get into some really practical things about do's and don'ts, and I will come back to the story a bit, because there's also some factors in the story that I want to reinforce, because every situation is unique, every situation is contextual, so you can't take one story, but at the same time I wanted to start there. Can we go to the next one?
Michael?
Yes, this is important. I am a huge fan of The Office. I don't know if you guys are. And I wanted to talk about, so when I think about engaging homelessness and men and women who are experiencing homelessness, this is what comes to mind to me. Because you miss, the classic Michael Scott, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Tonight we're going to talk about, I break down a lot of our philosophy as an organization into three things, which is engagement, connection, and advocacy. Engagement, connection, and advocacy. Engagement is what I want to go over tonight. Because engagement is everything that you guys are doing here at All Angels. It's everything that we're doing at organizations like the Bowery, in terms of the Choose Help model that you guys are doing, New York City Relief in terms of the bus, and if you're doing outreach, if you're walking by the street and you see someone on the sidewalk, you're engaging that person. And there's some things that you need to be aware of when you're engaging someone. Again, is that this person isn't there. That person isn't there just plucked out of nowhere. No one wakes up one day and says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out on the sidewalk and I'm going to write a sign on a piece of cardboard and I'm going to panhandle all day. And that's how I'm going to, that's my dream in life. That just doesn't happen. I've yet to meet that person. Maybe you have. If you have, you can point him to me and I'll have a conversation. But according to the Coalition for the Homeless, I did some research for you guys tonight. A couple leading causes for homelessness. It's not, believe it or not, it's not mental health. It's not like the primary one. The leading cause, according to the Coalition for Homeless, is affordable housing, lack of affordable housing. In New York City, you guys know this, right? Cost of living is crazy. This was an interesting thing I learned, that the 2017 housing wage averages is $21 an hour. To be housed, it averages $21 an hour. The average wage for someone who's working part-time, like the hourly wage for someone working, hourly wage is $16.38 an hour. So you're talking about a huge discrepancy. So affordable housing is a huge problem. Employment, people are not working. Low earning jobs are a huge problem. You guys know that there's a lot of folks who don't have the necessary, this is another misconception. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on the street who all really want to work. Like, you know that stereotype about the lazy person who just doesn't want to work? Like, that's bonkers. It's hogwash. There's so many people who are homeless who just desperately want to work, but there's not jobs available. They can't find the right jobs, or their health keeps them from getting those jobs. There's just so many issues in terms of employment. Affordable health care. We all know that health issues are a huge deal. If someone is not getting adequate health care, if someone has mental illness, if someone has physical illness. I have a friend named Even, who I met in the street, who had leg ulcers, and he just continued to land himself in the hospital, and he just couldn't get his leg fixed, because if you don't have a place to stay, if you don't have an established place to, like, respite care, like what happens, how many people have we met who are going in for surgery but are homeless, right? Like, you need surgery, but you're home. What do you do in that situation? How on earth are you supposed to, I had 3 knee surgeries, I mentioned that, right? I came home from the hospital and I sat on my couch in my living room with my leg up for like a couple days. And I have an RN for a wife who was able to take care of me, and I had a roof over my head, and I had people bringing me food. And imagine if you don't have those things. Health is a huge issue. Domestic violence is a huge issue with homelessness. 90+% of the women who are in the street have experienced some form of sexual assault in the last 30 days. It's madness. There's so much pain and so much hurt associated with domestic violence, and the options are not good. People are not choosing, the solutions are not readily available. There's not a lot of oh, well, why don't they just? Well, there's 100 reasons why they don't just. Hundreds of reasons. And we have to understand that if we're going to engage these men and women, if we're going to engage them in a way that offers dignity and offers respect and that honors them, we always have to keep in the back of our mind, there are these issues that lead to this situation and make it even harder to deal with. Mental illness is a reality. Mental illness is a struggle. Honestly, mental illness is not something even that's relegated to the homeless population. Mental illness is in this room. I represent mental illness as the person standing up here. That's just a reality. So to pretend like there's like this thing that people just need to get medicated and get to counseling and somehow that'll solve, like that's the solution. It's bonkers. But it's a very real issue that needs to be considered. And then addiction. Addiction is one of those things that's common. It's a common thing, again, not just among the homeless population. Addiction is common in this room. Addiction is represented up here as well, like I said. And the truth is that all of these issues oftentimes are co-occurring and intertwined. So when we talk about engagement, when we talk about engaging men and women who are experiencing homelessness, we have to understand that these are the issues that are presenting themselves. And honestly, here's the thing. I'm not talking to you guys up here as an expert in any one of these. I'm really not. I'm not up here pretending that I am a mental health practitioner. There are people here in this room who know way more about mental health than me. And you should be the one talking about mental health, and that's absolutely accurate. I'm not an expert on healthcare or domestic violence or mental illness. The reason why I'm up here is because I have spent 8 years trying to form a way to engage men and women that are dealing with these issues so that I can then point them to other people who are actually able to help them delve more deeply